Welcome to Building Fortunes Radio. Make sure you check us out at buildingfortunesradio.com. Along with our marketing partners, we're here to help our PM Marketing Network Leads customers build their businesses and make the world a better place. At Building Fortunes, we know how much your business means to you and the people important to you. So spread the word, tell a friend, join our newsletter, and go make a difference in your world. Now on to our show with your host, Peter Mingils.
Hello, everyone. Peter Mingils here. You're listening to Building Fortunes Radio on www.buildingfortunesradio.com. It is it's actually Saturday night at 8:30 p.m., and I know a lot of you are probably doing other things as you might be listening in if you are live. And if you are listening in live, you might have also found us on one of our other locations. You can find us on buildingfortunesradio.com. Find this special segment in MLM After Hours, because it is definitely MLM After Hours at this time at night on a Saturday. And on this specific show, I get a chance to share a microphone with a gentleman named Scott Johnson, and we get a chance to talk about some of the events that are happening in the world of MLM or home-based businesses or direct sales or maybe stuff related to internet marketing, and kind of blend all this stuff together to give people the advantages of education that they need to be able to build their home-based businesses better. I was thinking about it a little bit earlier today as I was going through some of the things that we go through during the week. I'm looking at this article or that thing and this thing and that thing, and other people are saying, can you check this out? And I'm always reminded of the great things that can happen in MLM. One of them being, like, I have a customer who recently told me that, now he can't say this as far as a testimonial. No, the FDA and the FTC won't let him say this. But he said, Peter, I had cancer, and 2 years after taking this product line that I'm on right now, he says, I am cancer-free. I am convinced that I am here, and I won't use his words, but he's basically convinced that he is here as a result of the products that he took associated with his MLM company, and he stopped doing chemotherapy. And, of course, we would never recommend anybody do that unless they go through medical advice and have medical attention and all those types of things, but that's what he did. And he swears that it actually saved his life, and he's going to share that personal testimonial with a lot of people. So I know that, and I could go through the dozens of telephone calls and voicemails and emails that I receive every single week from people that sing the praises of MLM. Well, for just as many of those, I also have some that are telling me their story about how that's it, they're done, they're never going to do anything, they lost a lot of money, their upline orphaned them, all that sort of stuff. So I figured the best way for those people to learn how to effectively build a business in the MLM world would be to learn the industry. Give me the ins, give me the outs, tell me the good things, tell me the bad things, everything. I want to know kind of like how to win this game if I'm planning to win it. And we discuss a lot of those things that sincerely a lot of distributors never get a chance to hear. So it's just identifying some of the potholes in the I'm even going to use the word scams associated with this industry that people really need to learn, so this way they can play the game better. So goofy and greedy people, usually the ones that get sucked into doing things they probably shouldn't, and we're going to help prevent those people that are not goofy and not greedy from making some of those challenging mistakes that they've made or other people have made before them. So I asked Scott to jump on this radio show with us on Saturday nights at 8:30 p.m. Eastern, because he also specializes in identifying specific areas of those potholes in relationship to network marketing companies, and that is the tools, TOOLS aspect of it. The books, the tapes, the seminars, the functions, the websites, the other things that may be necessary but may not necessarily be necessary to line the pockets of uplines. So I wanted to introduce Scott Johnson, who has a website called StopTheAmwayToolScam.wordpress.com. So it's easy to remember, StopTheAmwayToolScam.wordpress.com. And I wanted to introduce him, tell you a little bit about his background, and then we'll move into this week's topics. And there's a lot of them for this week. So Scott Johnson, thanks for being here. And, you could say hello and then start to share with us a little bit about your background.
Hey, Peter. Thanks for having me in again tonight.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I was an Amway distributor. It's called an IBO now, independent business owner, from 1993 until 2009. And I've made every major function except for two. And one of them was because of back surgery, and the other one was because of pancreatitis surgery. so I was what you call one of those loyal people, because I made every other major function and only missed a handful of other meetings because of those two situations, and lost money every year, and I couldn't figure out why. And certainly because of what happened to me, and I'm not, blaming anyone, it's just all of us go through life. We have different interruptions, whether it's, back problems or pancreas problems or moving because of a job or getting laid off of a job. All of those things happened to me over a period of time, and one of the mantras was you have to be consistent and persistent, and if you get interrupted for any reason, whether it's internal or external, you got to start over again. And I happened to believe that, and so I just kept getting restarted and kept losing money year after year until I found out that in 2005, I found out that most of the money that's being made at Amway at the upper level of the distributor/IBO is not from Amway. It's from the tools they sell their downline that you mentioned. It's all the meetings and the books and the tapes and the voicemail and the website access. All of these things make a lot of money. In fact, one time I was on a blog, and one of the people that was on there was actually proud that his upline was making $20,000 a month just on the voicemail, but then he corrected himself and he said, he's making only $5,000 a month, and that's just on the voicemail by itself. And so you can see how lucrative these tools are, and a lot of people don't have a problem with it, but I do, because most people don't know most of the money is being made on tools, and some of the ones that are aware of it don't seem to have a problem with that, but I do. I think that if you're going to run a business, you need to be upfront. You need to tell people that, hey, my mansion or my luxury automobile or my boat or my airplane or whatever it is, it didn't really come from my MLM. It came from the tools that I'm selling you, which are teaching you how to be successful. And that's how I'm making most of my money. Now, I know they won't ever say that, because if they did, then the whole business would disappear. It would evaporate. And so it's pretty easy to understand why they don't say that. But I just happen not to agree with that perspective. So I guess that's my short story.
Absolutely. And tell us about your website, because some people are unfamiliar with your website.
Yeah, as you mentioned before, it's the website name is stoptheamwaytoolscam.wordpress.com. And on there you'll find the front page. It goes A through, I think it's T or something like that, through the alphabet. I've got different sections. Each section has a different topic to it. And most of those sections are static, or at least largely static. I don't make too many changes very often to them. But the one that changes a lot is section D, as in David, and that's MLM news. And that section I update probably at least once a week, often 2 or 3 times a week, with just news in the industry, something that happens that I think is important or significant or interesting or whatever, just to show that there are things happening in the industry. It's not just all old news. That's one of the common things that you'll hear from MLMs too is, well, that happened, but that was 20 years ago. That's ancient history, and, that doesn't happen anymore. But what I find is stories that happen over and over again, whether it's 10 years ago or 20 or 30 or 40 or yesterday, just to show people that things really don't change. There might be some new names or some new circumstances, but by and large, the same things that have been happening for a very long time are still happening today. And so there are lessons to be learned and applied, not only from the things happening today, but things from years and years ago, because those same things are happening. There are things to learn, even if it's a 40-year-old story. And so that's why I think it's important to know not just what's going on today, but what has gone on in the past decades, so that you can see the patterns and you can see the consistency of problems that occur. And like you, I'm not anti-MLM. I'm just anti-MLM scam. And we've mentioned the tool aspect. The other big problem that many, many MLMs have, I would even say most, and the exception to these would be what we would call the party plans. Those MLMs like Tupperware and Pampered Chef, where people aren't invited into a living room. You invite your friends, relatives, and neighbors. Somebody presents the products. Some of the attendees buy some of the products. They are also, some of them are interested in actually hosting a party because they get some compensation for that, or even joining as a distributor and do the same thing, go around to different living rooms and show the wares and excuse me, and look for customers. And so those I don't really have an issue with, unless, of course, they have a tool scam. But the vast majority of MLMs are not party plans, and most of them have overpriced products, which are typically not sold to external customers. It's almost all internal consumption, and that's the very definition of an illegal pyramid. And that's the other big problem besides the tool scams, is the lack of retail sales in many MLMs, which is an illegal pyramid. So that's kind of the high-level view of the two major issues that I think are in the industry.
Right, excellent. And I don't know, Scott, if you want to bring a topic to this. I have a few of them that we can discuss, but did you have anything you wanted to bring as far as new events that happened this past week or will be happening next week?
Well, there's one thing that is happening next week that's very interesting. A senator from New York State, and this is a state senator, not a federal level senator, he did a study recently about Herbalife. He pretty much did some of the same things that Bill Ackman did 3 years ago, going in and looking at these nutrition clubs and gathering information, and he came to the same conclusion that Bill Ackman did, was that these nutrition clubs appear to be scams. Most of the people lose money, and they really are not a legitimate business. And he's looking to write legislation for New York State which will clamp down on some of these abuses. And he's having a conference call next Wednesday, and I'm trying to tie into that.
Actually, he's not having a conference call. He's actually doing a physical meeting.
Yes, he's doing thanks for correcting me. He's doing a physical meeting, and I've asked his office if they could set up a conference call so that I can tie into it from here in Texas, rather than traveling all the way to New York State during the week. And so I talked to somebody in his office, and they're trying to set that up, and they have my name and number, and hopefully we can make that happen, and I can give him some input on his proposed legislation, because there's a couple pieces in there. At least I looked at an early version of the legislation, and a lot of it references franchises, and at least on the federal level, now New York state law might be different, but on the federal level, there's a very separate distinction between a franchise and a business opportunity. Franchises are defined as if it costs $500 or more to join, then there's additional disclosures that are required to be made, whereas a business opportunity, if it's less than $500, the disclosures are much less. And that's where a lot of MLMs get in and take advantage of people because they don't charge a lot to join, obviously, but also at the federal level, the disclosures are not very extensive for a business opportunity, and so that's kind of a weak link in our laws. So anyway, he references franchises a lot. I just want to talk about that with him and see if he really needs to use that word, or if business opportunity would be a better word to use in the legislation, just to make sure we don't get the terms mixed up. And I also want to make sure he understands the issue of saturation, because we've talked before that I don't believe in that endless chain saturation theory, and neither do a number of judges in court decisions. They don't believe in saturation, and we've never seen it. I mean, you take Amway, for example. They've been around for 56 years, and I was even told when I was in Amway, we're trying to saturate it. We've been trying to saturate it for 3 or 4 decades, and we can't do it. And therefore, this can't be an illegal pyramid, because they being the MLM or anti-MLM quote-unquote experts, say that illegal pyramids saturate. And that would actually be a blessing if they saturated. The problem is they don't saturate. They just churn people through at the bottom and just keep finding new people to come in and take their money and get them out and find new people and, just keep, sort of like shampoo, rinse, repeat. and so that's going to be happening. I'm excited about hopefully getting involved in that and maybe even having some follow-up conversations with him in his office to make sure that their legislation is the best it can be, and hopefully we can raise this to a national level as well, because, I mean, New York's a big state, but it's just one state, and maybe some other states will get interested in this kind of an issue as well. You still there?
Oops, I'm sorry. I pushed my mute button.
I'm sorry.
I want to give us credit a little bit on Building Fortunes Radio and me specifically, because I wouldn't have known about this event had it not been for the radio shows we've been doing with Roger Van Vlissingen. So if you're unfamiliar with this, you can also catch Roger as well. We do a radio show with him and E. Robert Smith and another gentleman named Dave Ritchie lately on Fridays. They kind of alternate based on whoever's available at that time. But Roger Van Vlissingen is an author for Seeking Alpha as well as other things. And E. Robert Smith, the same thing, and same thing with Dave Ritchie. Well, Roger is in or around the Bronx and actually is working with that senator to put on that event or be part of that, whatever that might be. So we'll have some boots on the ground and be able to get Roger Van Vlissingen's experience from that as well. And the reason why this is kind of important is because it does potentially start to change the rules on which some people may be able to do certain aspects of the MLM business model. Now, I just have to explain. If you Google search my name, so my last name is spelled Mingils, M-I-N-G-I-L-S, and tie in with that FTC, and then tie in with that business opportunity, you'll see that my name is on a signature associated with the Distributor Rights Association when we were fighting the potential changes in the business opportunity ruling. So Rod Cook still is probably a crazy man. I say that with a certain level of respect. Rod Cook is definitely out of the box. He's when he was healthier, he's not as healthy as he used to be, but when he was healthier, he was really something else. Regarding almost like the guy who would break down the door in a SWAT team, raid. He would be the guy that would be like, everybody's getting ready, and he's already busted through the door. So he wanted to sue the FTC based on the business opportunity rulings that they were planning on doing. And we kind of calmed him down a little bit. And then the FTC called me specifically, because I was the president of the DRA at that time, and asked, hey, listen, do we really have to go through this lawsuit? Because Rod Cook wanted to sue the FTC. He said, do we really have to go through this lawsuit? Or we were planning on doing these workshops. So Rod Cook and his wife Marcy actually went down to Washington, D.C., and had an opportunity to meet with the FTC and some other people relative to the business opportunity ruling. And depending on who you talk to, you could read all about the workshop. And when you read the ruling on the business opportunity ruling, they will give you the notes from the workshop on how they were excluding MLM. So you'll find, and I don't know the number, so I'm going to mention the number 29 just for exaggeration purposes. You'll see 29 pages of dialogue in the workshop and the build up to the business opportunity ruling where MLM was going to be excluded. So they include that in the final ruling. However, they do not exclude MLM. So for those people that don't know how to read, and some of them unfortunately are expert witnesses, for some of them that don't know how to read or don't know how to pick up the phone and talk to the people that actually wrote the thing and say, listen, this is who I am and this is what we do, and are MLMs excluded? Well, guys like me put boots on the ground and make the phone call, so I actually called and spoke to Christine Tardera, who was part of that whole thing, and I said, Christine, are MLMs exempt? And I don't know how many other ways I have to ask the same question so we get some kind of a ruling, because my people, quote unquote, in part of the associations we're with, they actually think that MLM is excluded, and I don't think so. So in reference to all of those things, I had asked and she said MLM is not excluded. If it fits under the rulings for the business opportunity rulings, they are business opportunity rulings. And if they had gone through the way they were initially going to go through, MLM would not be the same today. You couldn't sponsor someone without a waiting period. Like in a franchise, like you mentioned the word franchise, Scott. And I'm going to apologize. My phone rang. My phone's ringing, and I forgot to shut off the ringer on the other line. Then you couldn't, if you will, even send people information without having them fill out some kind of a disclosure or some kind of a waiting period type of a thing. You couldn't actually sell somebody on your MLM before you gave that party that you were trying to sell or sponsor all of the lawsuits or references of all the lawsuits that your company had been under, 10 references of people that had recently purchased your product, a listing of, if you will, some of the previous distributors that had bought and joined so they could actually interview with them. It would be very cumbersome if we in MLM had to deal with the same rules as franchises where there's usually a significant investment. Well, as a result of any or all of those things, that's the sort of stuff that we're talking about right now relative to what might be happening with the nutrition clubs is we, meaning like people in MLM, don't want to be lumped into that same thing. But we might want to watch out because we might be lumped into those things if we're really not cautious, because the average MLMer is not planning on opening up a retail store, and he's not planning on serving anything that might be even related to food or beverages, and he's not planning on having people that are almost employees as far as the restrictions and the requirements that you give them. So the nutrition clubs are certainly problematic in this example, and we're going to see what happens with this state senator who is going through whatever he's going through, and we'll have, hopefully, maybe through the doors that you might open, Scott, maybe access to conference calls where we can actually hear it, but we'll certainly be able to get some of the information secondhand through a first-hand witness that was there, certainly with his opinion or spin. So I just wanted to throw that stuff in there as well. So if you want to see the business opportunity ruling, type in my last name in any kind of a search with FTC and business opportunity, and you'll see the documentation that we signed. And then you could even, I think they have put in a YouTube movie and a few other things as well, but it's quite different than what it was supposed to be originally, but MLMs are not exempt. And I know that if we, and I'm not going to mention the names, but if we had some other people on our call right now, they would say MLM is exempt, and I would say no, it's not, and we'd ping-pong back and forth, and we'd probably get on the phone with somebody eventually that would tell us MLMs are not exempt, but what they read and what they understand are two different things sometimes. So having said that, Scott, back over to you.
Yeah, I guess a couple things on that. One is you mentioned Peter. He's also, Roger. Roger has also done some, I guess, training or educational sessions in the Bronx because he does live there where the state senator is, and he has, gone to community meetings just to educate people about MLMs. And so he is one of those frontline guys that's trying to help out his, neighbors with that process. Now, my understanding, Peter, and I don't want to certainly have an argument on the radio with you, but my understanding is that the FTC did exempt MLM from the business opportunity rule, and I think their response was that MLM still falls under Section 5 of the FTC, which prohibits unfair and deceptive business practices. But all those requirements you mentioned, which I agree with you, I believe those were not good types of disclosures for MLMs. It would have been very cumbersome, and even it would have negatively impacted the MLM business from the standpoint of just creating all kinds of misinformation and things that just didn't make sense in an MLM framework. But my understanding was that MLM was exempt from those new rules, those new disclosure rules, and that they did not have to provide all of those sorts of disclosures up front like other business opportunities do at this point.
They don't have to offer all those disclosures, but it is not exempt from the business opportunity ruling. because I asked, like, for instance, if you wanted to sponsor someone in, you don't have to give them a 7-day waiting period, where you send them like this whole portfolio stuff. And if your company is in a lawsuit, you don't have to hand somebody a piece of paper that says, do you understand that we're all in all these lawsuits, and here's all these lawsuits, so here's where you're making this decision. You don't have to deal with those things. But Christina Todaro would never say, when I was on the phone with her, that MLM is blanketed exempt. She would not use those words. I say, Christine, are we exempt? She said, no. Where the business opportunity ruling is applicable, it is applicable. And she did not say, no, Peter, you guys have a get-out-of-jail-free card. She didn't say we're exempt. She did not say that at all. Now,
okay, but they're not. But MLMs are not required to make all those disclosures, which I thought was the real. I thought that was the real meat of the new business opportunity rule. So it's kind of a technicality to say, MLMs fall under that, but they don't have to give any disclosures because that's the real meat of the new business opportunity rule itself. Correct.
So the real business opportunity ruling, where you have to hand somebody like a stack of documents before they can join for $10, is not applicable with MLM. But there was still a lot of the safeguards in place as far as the business opportunity ruling. So if an MLM did fall into some of those types of things, like for instance, if a franchise is going to promise you that that they'll set up locations for you, like a vending machine. They'll say, listen, you do this, and then we'll make sure you have these number of locations and all that sort of stuff. That would fit into the business opportunity ruling. So the other challenges as well was what a company would be able to do to provide for distributors. Now, so I'm going to give you something that seems like a contradiction of like, wow, boy, that would be really weird. When these business opportunity rulings were happening and they were being refined, they kind of said, well, they didn't kind of say, they said that a company cannot promise you that they will be able to help you find customers or give you customers and all of those types of things, in essence, be able to help effectively build your business. Like, for instance, with Trivita and companies like Trivita, they said, well, you could just buy customers. Company do all the work, you just buy the customers, you get the retail profits. You could build a business. The FTC in their ruling says you can't do that without further disclosure. So a lot of companies continue to do that. Now, oddly enough, there was one company in the whole entire industry that I knew, so I got to throw in that I knew, so you'd say, Peter, you don't know all the companies. I'd say exactly. But there was only one company that I knew that stopped their customers to their distributors as far as being able to buy customers, and that was Zeke Rewards. They were the ones that actually stopped doing all of those types of things as a company when the government was changing their rules. And the only reason why I know this is because I got a phone call from people from that company who said, did you know about this? And I said, no, I really didn't know about this at all. And by the way, nobody else knew about it as well. Dr. Keith Lagos brought it to my attention as well, and we dug in and we found that was true. So there's still a lot of companies that say they do those things for you, and they can, I suppose, but they'd fall into the business opportunity rulings, which means that are they doing all those disclosures, and the chances are they're probably not. So it gets a little messy along the way, but MLMs are not exempt from the business opportunity ruling.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying there. Technically, they're not exempt, but they are exempt from all of those detailed disclosures.
Right, they don't have to do all those.
Earlier.
They don't have to do all those disclosures.
Right.
But if
right.
an MLM, but if an
I think
MLM
we're on the same
company,
page then. Yeah.
Yep. If an MLM company says that they're going to provide for you everything, so you could buy it, like with Zeke Rewards, people were able to buy a customer. Without doing the work themselves, they could buy a customer, which means the company set up the program, the company did the things, the company did everything. That, in essence, was no longer going to be allowed. They considered it whatever they considered it. That was no longer allowed. Some companies still do that because they don't care. Some companies still do that because they don't think they'll get caught. Some companies still do that because they don't know any better. But they can't do that same thing anymore without changing the way they disclose the business opportunity. Because that's
right.
the way a lot of these companies were sold. You don't have to do anything. You buy it almost like you're an investor.
Right.
So
yeah,
when that
and
happened, the rules were changed.
Yeah, and just to give myself a plug, because like they say, if you don't plug yourself, nobody else will. If you look at that business opportunity rule, I'm actually mentioned as a footnote because the FTC mentioned that some of the input they got was over the tool scams. I'm not sure if they used that exact term, but it was, secretive in excess of tool profits. And the footnote to that particular remark in the FTC decision had my name, Johnson, as the footnote. And I'm pretty sure I've got either one or two of my inputs that I gave the FTC during that business opportunity rule comment period on my website. I think one of them's still on the FTC website and the other one's not there, but I think I was able to get a copy of it. But it's nothing new. It's things that I mention every time we talk on the radio, talking about the tool scam and the hidden profits from the tools and the problem I had with that. And so since my input was not really responsive to what the FTC was looking for, it really didn't get built into the business opportunity rule, but at least they made a note of my input, and they thought it was important enough to at least mention in their decisions.
Excellent. And I know that there's always going to be some challenges relative to the way people interpret that thing, but for the most part, the good part about it was that for whatever you want to have somebody sponsor or join, you don't have to give them a stack of thing and have a stack of documentation, disclose everything on the planet. And what one of Rod Cook's biggest issues is that since a lot of women do network marketing, that for people that were predators, they would actually have the names and the phone numbers and then contact information for 10 local women. So there was a safety potential challenge as well by having that full disclosure. So it was something that was looked at. The FTC kind of abandoned it, but they did not exempt MLMs. So that's the most important thing. And if you're an MLM, you don't have a get out of jail. You can do whatever you want card relative to the business opportunity ruling. So, and I will be totally open to be corrected by anyone at any time. But I had that conversation with Christine, and I said, "Are we exempt?" And she said, "No." She said, "No."
I think we're on the same page. I mean, I think MLMs are exempt from all of those disclosures, but they're not exempt from the other pieces that might be in that new business opportunity ruling. And certainly, I think whether it's MLM or even non-MLM, you would still fall under the Section 5 of the FTC law, which talks about unfair and deceptive business practices. Those are prohibited. Now, that's kind of a generic, nebulous term, which probably would benefit from having a little bit more detail added to it, but it does give the FTC some flexibility as well. So it kind of, cuts both ways. It gives them flexibility, and yet it's kind of a mystery from a legal perspective, at least. What is unfair and deceptive? I know what it means from a logical standpoint, but then you get into the legal realm, and you kind of have to suspend reality and common sense sometimes, and you come out with some really interesting results that most people wouldn't have imagined. And so I think that the whole country would benefit from having better definition of what is unfair and deceptive. Certainly, various court rulings have put some definition around those terms, things that are decided are now precedent, and they can be used in other future lawsuits and cases. And so we are getting there. It would be nice if the legislature stepped up and did something a little bit more meaningful, but we're getting there piece by piece with the courts and the precedent-setting process.
Right, exactly. So let's talk about some other things that had happened along the way. Let's see. Oh, and just by the way, while we were talking, I'm grabbing my notes. I'm going to read over my notes real quick. On February 16th of 2012, Peter spoke to Christine, and she said no exclusions for MLM. Basis and purpose, 6-page PDF, whatever that means. If the company fails if the company falls within the guidelines, then they must meet the requirements of the business opportunity rule as defined in the rule. Then she said refer to 16 CFR 1.1 through 1.4. So that was it. And then she said, we might request a process called an advisory opinion, which is basically ask them to kind of comment a little bit further on it, maybe give a little bit more clarification. But that was her comment specifically on that specific date. So anyway, so back to all of this stuff. There's some things happening in the world of finance that are going to have some levels of ramification, I think, on the MLM world. And some people aren't familiar with this. And remember, I gather a lot of my information from people that are experts in other areas who kind of bring this to my attention. So I give you the layperson's example, certainly not the specific definition of it. But if you go to the web and you type in a search Operation Choke Point, then you'll find that our fine government has identified for the banking system, and I'm using all the wrong words, the businesses that are what are considered to be somewhat high risk. Like if you want a red flag on your bank or your business, be part of these industries. And part of those industries would be things like gambling or things like dating sites or escort services or guns or ammunition, somewhat controversial types of businesses, as well as MLM. Pyramid schemes, of course, but MLM specifically. So the government basically said to banks, if you want us to look a little bit further at you, we're just kind of red flagging you right up front to say, if you're dealing with any one of those businesses, ammunition or whatever, you better watch out. So, and this isn't Peter Mingils making this stuff up. If you did some Google searches or some search engine searches and you found gun stores lost their merchant accounts, meaning they can't take credit cards anymore because they deal with guns. That was the bank saying, we don't want to deal with you guys anymore. Well, sometimes that has happened with MLM. So it's kind of like not really been a big issue until just recently. Zeke Rewards was a good example of the receiver going after some of the banks that allowed these businesses practices to be in effect. KYC, know your client or know your customer, some people like to refer to, means the banks were responsible for investigating the company that they were providing the services for. Now, Zeke Rewards went after a little bit on the banking side. Telexfree is a totally new animal. And I always like to give credit where credit is due. I found out about this by going to patrickpretty.com. So if you went to www.patrickpretty.com, you'll see that he's more or less an anti-MLMer, but he posts some good stuff, so you can find some really good stuff there. And if you find the article about Jan Schiffman and the legal recording that they did about the bankruptcy that Telexfree has done, you will find some really interesting information relative to that. Now, Telexfree was much bigger as far as a Ponzi scheme than Zeke Rewards ever was, probably 4 to 1. Probably more widespread, and that most of you didn't hear about it is probably because it was mostly in other countries, although they did have a pretty big Brazilian U.S. presence, but it was more of the really Brazilian Americans, like the ones that really kind of speak whatever the Brazilian Americans speak. So we didn't hear a lot about it if you're in the English-speaking world or you weren't part of that affinity Latino community. So
yeah, I think that's important too, because you're right. Brazilians speak Portuguese, which is of course different than Spanish, which most of the rest of actually all of the rest of South and Central America speak Spanish. So there really wasn't a whole lot of news in the Spanish outlets about Telexfree because it was from Brazil, or at least it had strong ties with Brazil, and it was Portuguese. And so it was one of those situations where I think if it had been from a Spanish-speaking country, there would have been a whole lot more news available. because it would have been in Spanish, and, there's a lot of Spanish media, TV, radio, online, whatever, compared to Portuguese. So, yeah, sorry to interrupt you there. That is a very interesting discussion. I'll let you continue.
Yep. So what happens is now what's happening in the Telexfree situation is they are really going after the banks as well. So the attorney, or one of the attorneys is somewhat knowledgeable about that, did an audio on the link that's associated with patrickpretty.com. So again, I like to give everybody credit where credit is due. This is where I saw it. This is where you can go and reference it. He has a lot of other, if he is a he, nobody knows really who he is, but if he is a he, he's got some nice material there. Now, I got to share with you, and this is where if he, quote unquote, were on the phone with us now, he could at least dispel some of these things. There's a few websites that are out there that are a little bit more like TMZ or National Enquirer, and they're definitely anti-MLMs, although he seems like, I've read some stuff from him, which if it's a he seems like a nice man, but he's definitely on the anti-side of the MLM, doesn't post anything that's good. He posts mostly the stuff that most people would want to know as far as bad. However, there's a lot of really good information on there, and I did listen to the audio, and it was a really interesting thing. Now, where is this interesting? Well, if a bank is charged a lot of money for dealing with an MLM company that was deemed a Ponzi scheme, then guess what? Banks will stop dealing with MLMs because why take the risk? Why take the risk? There's, of course, J.P. Morgan, and you can find this on PonziTracker.com. Again, I like to give credit where credit is due. Jordan Maglich is an attorney. I read his articles sometimes on PonziTracker.com, and he is definitely, he's not an anti-MLMer. He just identifies Ponzi scams and Ponzi things. So you can find that J.P. Morgan, Chase, one of the largest banks on the planet, was just fined $2.6 million for what they did with Bernie Madoff. And you might say, well, the Bernie Madoff thing doesn't necessarily have anything to do with MLM, but it does have to do with they got a hurting from legal regulations of not knowing their customer, or knowing their customer, allowing things to happen. Well, just recently in the same article, you will see that the Golf Channel is being sued by the receiver for Stanford, which was another big Ponzi scheme having nothing to do with MLM, but they went after the Golf Channel. The Golf Channel, they're trying to pull $6 million from the Golf Channel because a receiver in a Ponzi scheme could go after people that had money given to them for whatever reason for perpetuating this thing. They went after the Golf Channel. Now, I don't know if it actually went through, but they still did whatever they did to the Golf Channel for $6 million. So you'd say, where does this whole thing, bubble up? Well, the whole thing bubbles up to know your customer. If the Golf Channel is getting handled by some Ponzi scheme by some guy named Stanford, if J.P. Morgan is getting hammered because some Ponzi guy named Madoff, if Telexfree is doing what they're doing in the MLM world, then all of this is starting to approach the MLM world. So therefore, how about your company? Like, how about the newest ones that are going to be coming out? What's going to happen? The answer is, well, we don't know yet because it's happening right now. But the reality is these things are changing in the world of banking with know your customer, Operation Choke Point, a whole bunch of other issues as well. And I thought that was pretty fascinating. That's not anything other than news, but it's certainly news to watch. So I don't know, Scott, if you have anything you want to identify about that.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of add to that because I also listened to that recording. I'm going to put a link to that recording on my website real soon too. But one of the things I thought that that attorney Dan Schlichtman talked about was the issue that a lot of companies are now structuring their operations such that if they get in trouble, the least costly and the least damaging to them personally, I'm talking about the company owners and probably high-level distributors as well, is to set it up so that when they get in trouble, they just declare bankruptcy and then it's kind of hands off. And that's pretty much my understanding of what Telexfree did. You know, as soon as the hounds were at the door, they kind of declared bankruptcy and you know, tried to walk away from it and minimize the damage at least on them personally. And the attorney was very concerned about that because it was sort of a way of, you know, setting up a bad business and then not being held responsible for your bad actions. And so that was another really interesting part of that talk that he gave. I was not aware of that issue at all, that companies were starting to do that. And I would look in the future for maybe some changes to laws to make sure that bad actors can't just declare bankruptcy and kind of walk away from it. Now, I should also say that the Telexfree owner, I think it was, he's under criminal charges too. So, you know, even though they declared bankruptcy, he's not going to have probably the rest of his life very pleasant. And that trial, I think, is sometime next April or May, the criminal trial. So, but anyway, there's a lot of interesting things going on, and certainly, you know, the Bernie Madoffs and the Stanford guys, they're probably going to be in jail for the rest of their lives, in prison. And those were Ponzi schemes, whereas Telexfree was determined to be a combined Ponzi pyramid scheme. You know, they had elements of both. And I don't know if you want to talk about the differences real quick between a Ponzi and a pyramid.
You certainly can, but the neat thing is, like you said, Bernie Madoff was a financial pyramid scheme, or a Ponzi scheme rather. Stanford was the same thing, didn't have anything to do with MLM, but Telexfree was an MLM, so it was definitely an MLM.
Yeah, it was an MLM, and it was a Ponzi. It was a sort of a pyramid / Ponzi scheme, is the way that everything I've seen describe it. You know, at least, you know, from a judge's ruling, they describe it as a combined Ponzi pyramid. And the biggest difference, you know, a typical Ponzi is just like Bernie Madoff. Hey, if you invest with me, I'll make you rich. You know, I'll grow your money 10% or 12% every single year. Whether the stock market goes up or down, you're going to get your 12%, period. And he did that for years and years. But the way he did that was not by investing in stocks. He would take the money from investors, and then he let the market, when I say the market, I mean just people talking to each other, he let them tell other people they knew that this Bernie Madoff guy is a wizard. Now, he is he was a former head of the NASDAQ stock exchange. So he was very high placed. You know, he was very well respected. So then other investors would approach him, and sometimes he would turn them down just to add to the mystique that they couldn't invest with him. And that just added more interest to joining Bernie, you know, the fact that somebody got turned down. But then what he would do is he would take the new investors' money and pay it to the previous investors. So when a previous investor wanted to take, for example, last year's earnings, those earnings really weren't there. It was exactly the money from the new investors, and that's how a Ponzi scheme works. Whereas an illegal pyramid, you've got layer upon layer of new people getting involved in a business. You know, they're more active participants. In a Ponzi, generally the people are not active. They're kind of passive. You give Bernie your money or Stanford or whoever, and they go and invest it and make you money, and you just sit back and collect. Whereas a pyramid scheme, generally you're an active participant. You're out there, you know, being sponsored and sponsoring others and so on and so forth. And there's multiple layers. Whereas a Ponzi, it's pretty much just one layer. It's the investor, you know, the investor that's joining by giving the person their money, and then that person receiving the money, not really investing it in stocks. You know, he's investing it in his own lifestyle and investing it in, you know, collecting it to be able to give to investors when they want to cash out. They have to keep enough cash around so when someone wants to cash out, it looks legitimate, that he really has it. And the problem with Madoff was in 2008 when the economy crashed, a lot of people said, hey, I need some money, Bernie. Well, guess what? He ran out of money real fast. And that's how it collapsed. And there was a fellow by the name of Harry Markopoulos who tried for 9.5 years and fed the SEC, the Security and Exchange Commission, loads of documents, loads of details saying, hey, this guy's running a Ponzi scheme, and the government is so inept and so incompetent that they didn't do anything. For almost a decade, nothing was done until Bernie turned himself in. And then the SEC realized that they had been getting spoon-fed information that would have put this guy away long before many investors lost their money. So I don't have a lot of faith in the government, if you can tell.
Right, in their ability. There was definitely some missing components of why in the world was this allowed to go on as much as it did, especially when they had the equivalent of several whistleblowers that were kind of putting this information in front of the SEC for a real long time. So that's the big question mark of why did it happen. But the idea is it did happen. So Ponzi schemes are different from pyramid schemes, and pyramid schemes or Ponzi schemes can still run rampant in MLM. So
and I think that the real lesson to be learned there is a lot of people say, well, our MLM has been FTC approved, or the FTC took a look at our business. Generally, the FTC does not do that. The FTC only answers to complaints, and then the complaints have to be loud enough and strong enough and enough quantity to get their attention. And so if you think the government's going to protect you from an illegal pyramid or from RICO fraud, from a tool scam, or from a Ponzi, you're mistaken, because once they do catch on, there's been so much damage done that it almost doesn't matter, because there's another MLM scam, waiting in the wings. When Telexfree gets shut down, there's 3 others coming along to replace it, and those companies are not being approved by the FTC. The FTC does not approve companies; they only respond to complaints. And so, just buyer beware out there. Don't expect the government to protect you, because that's just not how they operate. And even when they do operate, to me, their biggest problem is just their lack of competence to look at facts and make judgments.
High volume. There's so many new companies that come up. I had a gentleman friend. His name is Ross. I won't mention his last name, but his name is Ross, and he was in charge of putting together some video things for some travel companies. And he did a video for one company, and the FTC called him up, and they say, "Why did you do this video?" And he says, "Well, I didn't do that video. I did a video, and they changed it," meaning like Ross's video was correct. The company said it's not sexy enough, so we're going to change it. So they changed it, and that's what got him in trouble. So the FTC said to my friend Ross, "Why did you make this video?" Because they tried to throw him under the bus and said, "Well, you're the ones that made the video." And Ross said, "But that's not the video you guys ultimately made. You changed it," and which is one of the typical complaints that most MLM attorneys have, is we didn't tell the company to do that, they changed it. So anyway, so then my friend Ross said to the people at the FTC, "Well, how about I do this? I'm starting a new company. Why don't I send you the information and you can kind of review it?" And they basically said to him, Ross, and I'm not quoting the FTC here, I'm just kind of giving you the illusion of the conversation that Ross told me. He said, "Listen, Ross, more than less likely, your company is just going to be like every other startup company, is going to fail anyway. So we can't review all the companies that are going to be opened up, because most of them are going to fail in a couple of years. They'll be a victim of their own demise. And we're just not big enough. That's not our job. Our job is not to do that." So, like you had mentioned a little bit earlier, they're more reactive towards complaints than they are towards, they're going to okay your business. Now, Canada, totally different situation from my understanding. In Canada, they kind of okay your business, and then you're okay. So that's why it's harder to do an MLM kind of thing like this in Canada than it is here in the United States. And the only reason why I mention that is because Carol LeClaire is a member of the MLMIA, and she's on our conference calls when we do the MLM After Hours on Monday nights on the 1st, the 3rd, and the 5th. And she's our Canadian contingency, so I'm echoing some of the words that I've heard her say. So that's why a lot of this stuff is more U.S. relevant as opposed to Canadian relevant, because in Canada they just have different rules on how they do different things. And Scott, I'll allow you to clean up anything that I just said if you're familiar with Canada.
No, I'm not real familiar with Canada, but everything you said is consistent with my understanding. It is harder to start an MLM in Canada for that reason. They have to have some sort of pre-approval. Of course, even if a country like Canada approves you, but you're lying through your teeth and they don't detect it, then it's almost worse than not being approved in the first place, right? Because they give you that good housekeeping stamp of approval, and then the MLM companies can leverage that with prospects and say, look, the Canadian regulators approved us, so we must be legitimate. And so it does cut both ways. And certainly I also agree with you. There's no way the FTC can keep up with all of the new companies coming on and starting up. The things that I would propose would be to make the rules a little bit clearer, a little bit more specific than unfair and deceptive, so that it's easier for people to know what the requirements are, and it's also easier for the FTC to go after these companies sooner because the violation would be more obvious. Whereas if you just say unfair and deceptive, that really requires a lot of work to gather all the facts and figure out if that fits the definition of unfair and deceptive. And so, the FTC kind of shoots themselves in the foot. I know they like the flexibility, but then they shoot themselves in the foot by having these very broad requirements that then require a very fact-intensive research and analysis in order to come to any conclusion. And so that's kind of the pickle we're in. My main point was, just because the company's been around for a long time and somebody's claiming we're FTC approved, in fact, I hear that from Amway people all the time, that they say that they self-report to the FTC or something like that. I've never heard of anything official from Amway about that, but it sounds real official. It sounds like the FTC is giving Amway a good rating, and that's just not their job. They just don't do those kinds of things. I think it was self-auditing was the term that I've heard quite frequently, and I don't believe that occurs in any manner with any MLM in the FTC to do any kind of self-auditing and self-auditing reporting. That's just a way of lying to people to make them feel comfortable with you and joining. And I believe that's just an outright lie. I can't prove that, but I just don't think the FTC operates that way.
Now, I'm sure the FTC doesn't have this little thing that says, you're self-auditing yourself for compliance reasons. I just don't see it. But believe it or not, Scott, we're almost done. So it's been another wonderful radio show. Hopefully some people have gotten some information from this and you can go and do some research a little bit further. But the neat thing about it is there's a lot of really good companies out there, and you can do things the right way, but you really need to be kind of cautious on some things that are being done the wrong way. And if you're really not sure, then make sure you speak to somebody that kind of knows what they're talking about, and that somebody that knows what they're talking about may not necessarily be within your direct line of sight. Your sponsor may be, their upline leadership, historically speaking, doesn't study their industry. They might make a lot of money, but they don't really study the industry, so you're the one who's going to be ultimately responsible for your own demise, I suppose. So make sure you do the research and listen to radio shows like this. Take a listen to some of the stuff that you see, and then unfortunately you're going to have to be your own filter sometimes, or ask some people that are a little bit more knowledgeable when you go to different websites, because there's a lot of people that kind of get it either wrong or skewed in their general direction. But I hope, Scott, we're going to be back next week, and we will be hearing maybe some of the things that happened with that Herbalife thing, so I'm looking forward to any impact that you can make on that, and I think we're done with our radio show. So stop the Amway Tools Cam. Yep. Let's go to stoptheamwaytoolscam.wordpress.com for your last plug. Perfect. Well, thanks, Scott.
I was just going to mention real fast.
Go ahead.
Okay. Is there a minute for me to mention something real quick?
Yep, absolutely.
I was just going to say, if anyone has any questions, they're welcome to email me, and it's a very creative email. It's stoptheamwaytoolscam@yahoo.com. If you have any questions about any MLM, I promise to be straightforward with you. I promise to be factual with you. if I say something, I'll back it up with documentation. And so I'm just open to anyone with any input or any questions that they might have about a particular MLM.
Perfect. Okay, good. We'll catch you next week. Thanks for being here.
You've been listening to Building Fortunes Radio on buildingfortunesradio.com. Thanks for listening. Be sure to check us out every Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time for the designated Building Fortunes Radio segment with Peter Mingils. Be sure to check out the buildingfortunesradio.com website for our featured segments. It's been our privilege to have you listen in. At Building Fortunes Radio, we wish you the success you deserve and are willing to work for. So spread the word, tell a friend, join our newsletter, and go make a difference in your world.